Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our Startup Week panel, Innovating with Open Data. Learn how Edmontonians are getting tons of value from free data. So this is the first time our Open Data team has run a live stream, so hopefully all goes smoothly technically. If you are having any issues hearing us or seeing us on the live stream, please let us know. You can reach out to our email address, which is opendata@edmonton.ca, or you can tag us on Twitter, OpenDataEDM. So I thought I would kick off the panel today with a land acknowledgement, and I'd include some maps, or as we like to call it, as data geeks, geospatial data. So the first map shows the Alberta treaties. There are 11 in Canada, and there are, several of those are in Alberta. And the second shows Métis regions in Alberta. So there's 8 Métis settlements in Alberta. And the City of Edmonton honors and thanks the many First Nations on whose historical and traditional lands Edmonton was founded, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge the diverse Indigenous people whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, from First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. We do this to create awareness, that we are all treaty people, and to show recognition and respect for Indigenous people and the traditional territories on which we live, work, and play. So I'd like to introduce our panel, who will each be giving a 20-minute presentation, but first we'll go around and do a round of introductions. I guess I should have put my name on here as well. So I'm Karen Parker. I am the acting director of the Analytics Center of Excellence, which is the area of the city that houses the Open Data program. And then we've got 3 panelists here today. And I'll get each of them to introduce themselves and to tell us their favorite data set. And we'll start with Elise Stole. Oh, okay. So I'm being told that they could hear me, but they couldn't hear you folks. So I think I'm having an issue with my audio inputs. So let's start again with the introductions. And let's start with Elise Stole. And Mac, I see you tweeted at me that you couldn't hear Elise or Fareeza. So let's try again. And please give us a thumbs up or thumbs down via Twitter if you can hear them.
All right. We'll do it again then. Not a problem. I'm Elise Stole, and I work for the Edmonton Journal. I've had many hats over the years. For quite a few years, I was a City Hall reporter, and in that capacity, I did quite a few data projects, including several that were in partnership, or at least the ideas came from different community members. So that's going to be a common theme in my presentation today. I'm going to explore how you can work with journalists when you have something really interesting that you found in data. Currently, my role at the Journal, I'm a city columnist, and I'm also an engagement journalist, which means that I'm exploring different ways for the Edmonton Journal to better connect with community members at the start of our research projects to hear back from the community on what's really important and help frame those stories. So excited to show you more.
And I have gotten the thumbs up that they can hear now. So apologies, I'm a bit of a newbie at video encoding to YouTube. And Fareeza, did you want to go ahead with your intro?
Sure. My name is Fareeza Khurshed. I'm the manager for analytics at Alberta Blue Cross. Speaking of wearing multiple hats, I'm also the chapter lead for Data for Good. Data for Good is a not-for-profit that assists other not-for-profits with their data analytics on a volunteer basis. We've been in operation in Edmonton for about 4 years now. I'm definitely in the data space, and I've used open data for everything from being nosy about what's going on in my neighborhood to answering questions for work and preparing government documents. So I've got a ton of experience here, and I love working with open data, and I know where to find most of it these days, hopefully. If I had to pick my favorite data sets, I probably have a hard time picking one, so I'm picking two. And one would be the census data set because it covers almost everything everywhere, which is pretty cool. And then the second one would be the city property assessment values because it just contains a lot of data about everything in Edmonton. And so if you get a little nosy about things that are going on, there's definitely ways to find it out there. Thank you.
Excellent. And Elisse Moreno.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Elisse Moreno, and I'm one of the co-founders of TruHome, which is actually a real estate team here in Edmonton, Alberta. However, we like to pride ourselves in the fact that we like tech as well. What can I say? For the last 5 years, we've been doing different data sets ourselves, mostly passion projects and things that we've been interested in. Very much focused on the real estate space, including aspects of the MLS data as well, which I know isn't open data, but we like to combine it with open data. I wouldn't say they're my favorite data sets, but they tend to be the two that I kind of gravitate towards a lot, and that would be roof lines and city assessment data are the two that I tend to go to when I'm working on projects with people.
That city assessment data is a favorite of a lot of people, I think, because, everyone likes to be a little bit nosy sometimes, I think, and see, what the values of different properties are. My favorite data set, I think, and, some folks will have seen me present this before at previous Open Data Day, is the pet license data. So the city obviously collects pet license data for a very practical purpose, but it also gives us this really fascinating data set, and that you can see what types of pets people in different neighborhoods own. And when I present at City Hall School, we always check the neighborhood the school is in to see if it's a cat or a dog neighborhood, meaning do they have more licensed cats or more licensed dogs? And you see really interesting patterns, like neighborhoods that are more dense and tend to have more multifamily housing, I usually have more cats than dogs. Anyway, so that's my
pigeon.
And yes, and pigeons. So I didn't know that you could own pigeons or that you had to license them until I opened that data set. So I think we'll jump right into the presentations. And Elise Stole, you're up first. And bear with us as we sort out, the technology here. We've got 3 different people in 3 different places getting their presentations together.
Yes. Okay. Let's go. And get this to work here. Oh, and it is not working. It looks like it signed me out. Karen, would you like to, should we throw to somebody else first while I sign myself back in?
Sure. Fareeza, are you okay to jump in a bit early?
Yeah, I'm good to go, Karen.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. So what I want to talk today is actually a little bit of, show a couple of examples of things I've done with open data across over the last 5 or 6 years, actually. And usually most of the stuff that I do, if it's open data and it's public, will be on Tableau Public. So I'm going to try and throw some Tableau Public dashboards. I'm going to jump straight into the dashboards just because I was going to provide a link to them, and I'll see if I can do that afterwards. But the way we have to share files here, it's hard to share multiple at one time. So I think I'm just going to go straight into them. There's two that I'm going to show right away, and one that's kind of interesting that's not as commonly seen as the Alberta Spatial Price Survey. So I'll try and share my screen right now. So the Alberta Spatial Price Survey was a project that was done a few years ago. The provincial government. So this is open data, but this is provincial open data, so not municipal. But what it did was it took a look at the different prices for regular household goods across the province in different areas. And so this type of data can be used if you're trying to figure out what the cost of living is in different areas of the province, and how does that vary? And does it vary, for everything, or does it vary for only certain things? So if we take a look actually at the survey, the way this is organized right off the bat, we can actually see what the top communities are in terms of expense. So Fort McMurray and some of the northern communities are not really that much of a surprise at their expense. They're expensive to live in, they're remote. They have fairly large number of people, so they're going to need a lot of things out there. So it gets expensive. The one that's slightly different or slightly interesting was Canmore and Jasper are two of the ones, and those ones are probably because of tourism more so, rather than necessarily the entire cost of living there being overly expensive. But what the good thing is you can actually start diving down a little bit deeper and take a look. So if you're curious to see where is it most expensive in the province for shelter, you can specifically look at shelter data and see that, Canmore is definitely the most expensive place to buy a place, but Fort McMurray was the second, followed by Calgary and Edmonton. And then everything else was less than that. This data is only up to date as of 2016, so it is a little bit out of date already, but it is kind of an interesting, it's an interesting data source for sure, and it was an interesting project to be on, and to be able to see sort of what the differences are across the province for different items. The second one that I want to show is one that I've been working on recently, and I'm going to have to figure out how to switch tabs now. Sorry, just one second. Alright. So this is something I've been working on for the last week or two, and it's still a work in progress. So if you actually go to the website, you find this dashboard, you'll actually see that I haven't allowed downloads yet. And the reason I haven't allowed downloads yet is because it still is a work in progress. And so what I've been doing here is actually trying to look for indicators, economic indicators that relate only to Alberta for COVID-19. And so things that we can look at that sort of to figure out what the impact on our province is. So an example could be air travel. So we could look at, how are people moving in and out of the province, and how many people, like domestic travel. Sorry, that's refreshing. We can see that in July, domestic travel was still down 40% year over year locally, but you can definitely see that, in April, right after the COVID hit, that was when it sort of started to be the worst. It wasn't actually the worst. May was the worst, year over year at least. But you're able to actually see that trend and see how it's been changing over time. If you hover over the actual bars, it'll also show you the month over month change. So how much did it change from May to June, and is the number going up? So you can actually see that for each of the different indicators in here. So what you're seeing here is a list of indicators that I've compiled from open data sources across different governments and different levels. So some of these indicators are pulled from the federal open data portal. Some are pulled from the economic dashboard or the provincial open data portal. And I think those are the primary sources that I've used. So you can also see bankruptcies, what's going on with bankruptcies. But the one that a lot of people had some interest in looking at was the consumer price index. So this measures how much things are the cost of goods increasing. So the everyday goods that we buy, are they increasing as COVID is happening, and which specific industries are showing that increase? So, all items are definitely increasing, a little bit. We can kind of see that happening. It hasn't been actually that bad so far. But if you start going down into certain items, you can see things are going up. So you can see that, food has gone up. And if you've been at a grocery store, you probably realize that. But it's also nice to be able to quantify it, to say that, food costs have gone up, 3 to 4% in the last few months. It does look like it's coming down a little bit. Whether or not that trend remains to be seen, we'll have to wait to see. The good thing is, though, you can really break it down and take a look at the different levels. Working at Blue Cross, for example, some of the things that we might be interested in as a company is, our medicinal and pharmaceutical products going up, which we would kind of expect to see because COVID is very much a healthcare issue. We'd also expect to see personal care services might be going up as well, some of the other things. And some of the other medical related items will also be going up. So this was one that I've been working on for the last little while using open data. And this shows you a bunch of different indicators that you can kind of take a look at if you want to. The other part of it is taking a look at what the government response has been. So the Canadian Emergency Benefit Response Benefits from Canada is kind of an interesting data set to look at. This one I didn't spend as much time with, which is why there's no really nice visualizations attached to it. But it does show how many applications have been processed. So they've processed 27 million applications. There's about 34 or 38 million people in Canada, I believe. So that's a lot of applications to process. I have no idea how that compares to the regular EI process, but I can't imagine that it's going to be. It's got to be orders of magnitude higher than normal, which is definitely interesting. So they did release a lot of statistics on at the Canada level. Unfortunately, they didn't release as much on the Alberta level. So if you try and drill down to the Alberta level, it's not as easy. The only thing that we can see there is the number of applications, I think. So graphing that, we can actually see that, sort of year to date, the unique number of applicants, sorry, that's not number of applications, it's unique number of applicants. Unique number of applicants so far in Alberta has been about 1 million people. To put that number in context, we have, I think, about 4.4 million people. So that's almost 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people who receive CERB. Again, to put that number in a little bit more context, our labor force is usually about 2 million, maybe 2.5 million. So that means that almost 50% of all working Albertans may have access CERB in some respects. You can also take a look and see what the breakdown is, and which the biggest, which has been the most affected age group. So which age group has been the biggest unique applicants, and you can also see that by gender, which is actually fairly balanced. One interesting thing as well about this data set is when they were collecting gender, they did go down into female, male, and gender diverse. So there's a very tiny little red dot in there that talks about the gender diverse. And at this point, the number is large enough to be released, which is also one of the first times I've been able to see it in actual data. So that's coming out of about 280 gender diverse applicants. So this is what I've been working on for the last little bit. I did detail my sources at the end of it, so you can kind of see some of the main sources that I've used for this data. All of this is hopefully going to be completed by the end of next week and wrapped up. But that was kind of all I actually wanted to talk about. So thank you for listening. Okay. Karen, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Fareeza. As I had mentioned at the beginning, but I do know we were having some audio issues, so I just want to reiterate, we will take questions at the end. We'll give everyone a chance to give their presentation. And we are taking questions in two ways. So you can add us on Twitter at OpenDataEDM, or you can send an email to opendata@edmonton.ca. And any questions that come in either of those two ways, we will, presuming we have time, we will propose them all to the panel participants. Okay, Elise Stole, did you want to, have you got your presentation ready, and we'll give this another go?
Yes, I will try this again. I think that I just need Fareeza to end her presentation. Yeah, there we go. Now I can try this. All right.
You're good.
So,
we can see your slides.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So I've introduced myself already, but I thought the most useful thing would be to talk about how you can work with journalists when you have a data project. So just to start us off, I'll give you one example. This is an example from the data actually comes from the City of Edmonton, their open data file. This is the idea and all the data analytics were done by Dustin Martin and Michael Brown. And what I did for this part was basically to sit down with them, did an interview about what data they used, why they did what they did, and what they saw that was so interesting in it. And then my part of it was to bring in some of the other academic literature and the thought around what this really means, the history and the context to it, so that I could write that up as a column. And so then it's a bit of a partnership to share what they've discovered in the context of what it means for the city budget. So the data that they used was looking at the value of property per square kilometer. And they did it per square kilometer because they wanted to show how people in a certain area are actually contributing, people in denser areas are contributing much more towards covering the cost of all those services that are based on area, like clearing the roads and building the roads. And so then when you look at those older, denser neighborhoods, they're actually paying a lot more of the cost towards maintaining their neighborhoods than some of the less dense areas. So what I plan to do is to go through a couple more examples like that, just to give you some ideas of some of the data sets that can work well when we write about them. If you have a data set and you want to work with a journalist, though, here, I guess some of my recommendations would be to find a journalist that you think will really understand the data that you're working with, ask good questions about it, because often, as you probably know, when you first get some data and when you first think that you really know something from the data, you have to ask good questions of it and really question, are you actually seeing the trend that you think you're seeing? What else might be going on? And how do you know what you know? So that's it's nice to be able to work with somebody who can ask those questions and to have a partnership where you're both asking those questions together. Be ready to share the raw data. When somebody comes to me with data and says, here's what I've discovered, what I really like to do is to sit down, look at the data together. So again, we can have that process of asking those questions. Sometimes people will do it differently, which is totally their choice. They will be part of an organization that does the analysis, comes up with some conclusions, and then sends out a press release to everybody at the same time. And then it's much more of a quick process, kind of a daily news. What does this mean? Questioning things kind of with a strict deadline that doesn't always lend itself to tell those really nuanced stories where you are working with the raw data and discovering it together. The other thing I say is be prepared to be clear about why you're doing something. Everybody has a different motivation that they come with. Some of the motivations are obvious. You'll see in the stories that I share going forward. But it's just, I need to know why you're bringing this. Is it because in one case, I had one person come to me who really wanted to find all the problems, really wanted to show how terrible Edmonton Transit was because they wanted to run for council and be elected for councillor. And it was just good that I knew that so that gave me some good context to understand what they were looking for. The other point I want to make is that there's a lot of different options in terms of what you do with your data. It can be as simple as sharing an idea with a reporter, or you can actually share your data. You can help and be involved and analyze that data if you have the opportunity to have a partnership. And you can often be interviewed and talk about its importance. But those are all optional, depending on what you're looking for. So if you have specific questions, you can also send them to me afterwards about that by Twitter or Facebook. So here's another example of a piece that I like a lot. This is an example of how sometimes an idea comes from someone and they're not necessarily involved in the whole process. Bashir Mohammed had a really good Twitter thread about how bike lanes are not evenly distributed across Edmonton. They're actually, you're much more likely to find bike lanes in some of the wealthier areas than in some of the poorer areas. So that gave me an idea. And then on my own, I think it was about a year afterwards or something, I asked the Edmonton police for their data on where people were being ticketed for riding on the sidewalk. And this is the piece that came out of that. I worked with a graphics person in our newsroom to, first I mapped all those things on just with Google, and then she turned those into a map so you can see all the places where maybe there really should be some kind of bike lane, because obviously there's a lot of people using it, and they're using the sidewalk and getting tickets for that. So here's another example from a little bit further back in history. Sorry that this is a little bit blurry because it's from 2012, so it's no longer online. But this was a data set. The idea came from a counselor with the Samson Cree. He had taken a look on his own reserve to see how many children were registered and in school and how many children were in a separate data set with Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada as registered to the band, and then compared those two and tried to get a sense of how many children weren't actually registered for school. So this is part of two pieces that I did exploring First Nations education, which for many, many years was funded at much lower rates than education officer. So again, it's an example of an idea coming from someone who had a good sense of where you could find data. He didn't do the actual analysis with me, but he was interviewed for the piece to give context to it in his own community. And then I hope that it helped to help everybody better understand the situation. Here's another good example of data where somebody who was familiar with the data and with what to look for had suggested to me what kind of data I would need to start to understand the issue that they were seeing. In this case, I had interviewed quite a few people for this story who were afraid to go on the record about it. So it was a process of finding multiple stories to back up what the other people were saying. And the data itself, I think, was one of the strongest pieces of the story, because by going deeper into the survey data, we were able to see that while some parts of the city had really strong good work culture, other parts of the city workforce seemed to be really suffering. So this was an example of data that the City of Edmonton did release upon request. I didn't have to go through the COIT process, but at that point they had not put it on the open data collection. And they've moved over time to be putting more and more data onto the open data page. Another good example of data that is freely available that Tyler had analyzed and was really interested in looking at who was actually funding council. He had a particular interest in that and came forward and explained what he had found. We sat down together, looked at the raw data, and then put together this piece, and I interviewed him about why he found it so interesting. And I'll post these again later so that you can read the stories if you want. But I just wanted to end with this because I think it's important to realize that more and more data has become available over time, and it's the many people over time who have been pushing to make this data public that we're benefiting from today. Many people long before me have been pushing for this, and recognizing that this is community data, it belongs to the community and that it should be available to the community. So that's my speech, and I welcome any questions afterwards.
Thank you, Elise. And now we're on to the second Elise, to Elisse Moreno.
Okay. Oh, I'm still seeing that Elise Stole is presenting. Perfect. Here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I'm part of TruHome, which we like to define ourselves as a community-driven Edmonton real estate team who focuses on using hyper-local data to provide a better home buying and selling experience. So we are 100% about finding data and using data to provide more context to consumers so they can better understand not only Edmonton as a city, but also real estate in general. So over the last 6 years, we've been doing a bunch of different open data. We've been using open data for various visualizations or tools or building tech products. And we're really focused on the idea that we're advocates of using data to tell stories and give people information. So a few of the things that I'll cover a little bit is about our TruHome match, our building age maps that we did. Natasha, former employee, an amazing person, did price predictions talking about how accurate is the city data versus the MLS system data for us. Looking at which neighborhoods have community leagues, because surprisingly not all of them do. Thanks to Elise Stole requesting the flood information, we were able to write a blog post understanding the Edmonton flood maps. And our latest project that we did this year was Edmonton lot size and roof line. So to talk a little bit about it, TruHome Match was an exploratory tool that we launched when we first got into the real estate tech space back again in 2015-16. And the idea was that not every Edmontonian or people that are moving into the city necessarily know the communities that they want to live in. And so we wanted to explore open data and see, and other data sources to see like what data tells about a person and why certain homes would better match them for where to live. And so we took information about the person, how old they were, whether they had any children, whether they cared about school data, school ranking, whether crime was important, transit was important, and amalgamated all of this data into a scoring algorithm to then recommend homes based on what we thought they'd like. It worked really well. We definitely saw people buying homes that matched some of these contexts, but it was also, like I said, an exploratory tool. If you're already an Edmontonian and you know you 100% want to live in a certain area, no matter what our tool says, I mean, it may not define where you end up moving. A big one that we found, which was really interesting, was the building age map. For us, this was a really fun project to see how Edmonton as a city expanded over the years. And this was prompted by Beta City YEG at the time, and we were one of a couple people that decided to take the task on and build this from a similar concept to other cities like Chicago, Paris, etc., that were building age maps. And then to build more context and a little bit more information about how Edmonton has naturally grown, we spoke to a local historian to help us figure out the proper ages dividers that we should kind of place the years on to see a better representation of the data. It brought a lot of dialogue. I would say, like from a community standpoint, I really love this project for the fact that we were able to have so much context on Twitter and even locally just about urban versus suburban living and whether the expansion further out is good. And we saw even in Elise Stole's first example about data, just seeing like, you know, sometimes the denser neighborhoods have more burden in comparison to our expansion moving out. And so, like I said, people visually being able to see this definitely added a lot of interesting context in terms of it. This one we did for Canada Open Data Conference, and it was all about price predictions. And our team at the time decided they really wanted to play with the idea of like the home data that we have in the MLS versus the city assessment. And if we combine it, how accurate is this data in terms of error rate? And this was interesting, one, because, you know, everyone always wants to know how much their home is worth and how accurate are us as agents coming out to give examples of homes, and even the error rate of the city. A lot of people think their home is worth more than the city. You know, there's certain error rates in that context. And so we definitely took a look at that, and it was a very interesting, more of a research paper or research analysis that we did on that topic. And I'm going to show you a couple more things really quick. Our latest thing that we did, it's not super pretty. We build a lot of internal tools for ourselves. Is a land assessment, is what a land size tool. And what we were trying to build here was to get an assessment of how big is a lot, because we have a lot of people that call us and want certain size lots to build infill projects or other things like that. And we need to have a quick glance to see, is the lot even the right size? How big is the current property being built on it, so that we can get a better context of, is it even something worth exploring as a piece of property that the client might be interested in? So just to show this home really quick, and I'm going to go min length of 5040. And you can see, like, for example, this lot is 49, this one is 52 wide, is what we're seeing. So it gives a really good context to it. Wanted to talk a little bit about like why we do data projects. I mean, obviously we help people buy and sell homes, but it's always been a passion project to find out this information. And sometimes it starts with an internal idea, like I wonder if, or I wonder what, and we just start exploring the data because it's just something that we're interested in doing. Other times it's a collaboration where someone comes to us with an idea or shares an idea of a data source, and we're just interested in exploring and playing with the data. So we're always interested in working with local Edmontonians, people that are passionate about the data, want to create visualizations, specifically in the real estate space. We'd love to partner with you and help bring those things to life and promote them from a real estate side. And then we also have to realize that we have a lot of challenges when it comes to data sets. For example, with our building age map, we really had to look at the correlation between the data, and knowing that sometimes it's about the larger context of a visualization rather than the minute points. So someone's house may not be accurate just because of the data that we get, but it still tells the story, and the goal of the story that we were trying to state is our focus. And so that's TruHome. Just like everyone else here that has young kids, I feel like we haven't been as active as we wanted, but we're happy that we were able to do that land size this year, and just constantly looking for new and cool ideas and how we can play with real estate data and the open data to create stories that inspire and at least let people talk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm just waiting for a few questions to come in. I know there's a bit of a delay on the live stream. So I will remind people again, they can send us questions for the panel on Twitter at OpenDataEDM, or to our email address, opendata@edmonton.ca. And while we're waiting for those questions to come in, I thought I'd show off our kind of fancy new open data portal. Not really fancy and new, but we've made some changes. Our staff have gone through and put a search front and center, so that it used to be a little harder to find the search bar and you had to kind of jump into the catalog first. We're really hoping that will make it easier for people to find things. And in particular, I wanted to highlight one new data set that was just added this week that I think is pretty cool. So we'll just wait while that loads. For those of you who aren't aware, if you want to see the latest and greatest on the Open Data Portal, if you go into our catalog, you can search for recently added, and it will show you the things that have been most recently added by our team. So at the top here is the Edmonton Council membership history. So with it being a year out until the next election, and there being lots of interest in kind of the history of Edmonton's council, and also groups like Parity Egg that are really looking to get a more diverse council in place, we've released some historical information, so you can check out how diverse or not various councils were through the years. So this is a data set with Edmonton Council membership history going back to 1892. So as the disclaimer says, it's all derived from publicly accessible sources, often historical in nature. And so the city clerk's office did do a lot of work though to research and make this as accurate as possible. And among the fields you can see...
Karen?
Yeah.
Do you have your, do you need to turn the video on just to double check?
You know what? I've done a little, so for the YouTube live stream, I've dragged a video in front. So it's for the other panelists, you might not be seeing this. I apologize. I went a little bit of a different way to get it into the video live stream. But there is in the list of columns here, so not only do we have the names and the terms of the councillors, but we also have the sex of each council member, whether they're male or female. And why we're using the descriptor sex and not gender is because, especially with historical information, we don't really have, we can't presume what gender folks identified as, but we do have information about what sex they were. But I thought this was a really interesting data set, driven by the city clerk's office. They were really excited to, come to us and we helped them release it. And I think it's an example of, how we're using open data in different ways, and not just necessarily taking our program data and putting it out there, but putting other things that citizens or people running for council might like to see. So I'm going to have a quick check into the Twitter feed here and see if we have any questions. So Mac Mail has a question for the panel. What data sets do you wish you had access to? What would you do with them? And maybe we'll go in order of presentation. So Fareeza, did you want to go first?
The usual biggest one that comes to mind is it's a data set that's maintained by Alberta Health, and it's the postal code translation file. It allows you to map a postal code to somebody's census district. So you can take a postal code and map it to a census district, or you can take a postal code and map it to a neighborhood in Edmonton or Calgary. That data set is limited by Canada Post. So Canada Post does not let anybody else use that data set for other purposes because it's a revenue generating service. But like Elise was mentioning earlier, there is a very strong argument that this data is open. We're taxpayers, we paid for it at some point in time. It really should be open for everyone. Even right now, the government of Alberta is spending the money and the work developing it, but it's not an open data set. If I had to pick any data set to go open, that would be a very, very strong one. And I'm seeing a couple of other heads nodding, so hopefully you agree.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue I've run into both for work and personal projects as well.
Mm-hmm. And for work I can get access, but personal, it's like I know it exists, but I can't. Okay, never mind, I can't use that. Okay.
Yeah. For a while, there was a guy who was running some sort of postal code lookup website too, and I know Canada Post came after him and asked him to take it down. It's I think they defend that pretty strenuously too.
They do. Yeah. It's a very good data set. It has a ton of value, and yeah, it's not easily accessible. Unless you have money, you can buy it if you've got money. But I don't have $5,000 sitting around for a data set, or I don't even know how much they charge for it actually right now. But yeah, buying data is expensive when you're just doing it for projects.
Elise Stole.
So right now, I think I'd love to see. It's kind of a data set, kind of a research set, but all the data on exactly how transmission is or isn't happening in schools. I just imagine, I don't know how it actually works, but I'm imagining in my head that there's this team of people who are getting all this data and looking for trends and trying to understand it. And I'm really hoping that they can use that, whatever they can learn to, I don't know, maybe eventually change some of the health protocol to make it a little bit easier for kids to work in groups and get out of their seats and move around a little bit more safely. So I'd love to see what they've learned so far.
I've been following a lot of the COVID data that the province is releasing, and it's fascinating to explore. And also there's so much, and I imagine there's so many things they're tracking and publishing, and it's probably very overwhelming to try to deal with it all. But if you kind of keep checking back on their pages, I know, every couple of weeks I see they've added something new, or I go, the other day I was looking for testing data based on age, because I was interested in if a lot of school-aged children were getting tested, and I thought, oh, they have it there now. So they are.
They have that kind of stuff. What I want is like going really down into the details, right? Like, if there's a restaurant, or when there are restaurant outbreaks, were they able to track it down to the actual method of, like, what was the method of transmission there, right? So getting down at that level, especially when they get to the point where, like for schools, once they get enough data that they're not going to be identifying individual students and pinpointing who came into the school and spread it how, eventually we should be able to have the data that can anonymize that, and yet really help us to learn what we do need to pay attention to and what we can let go in order to balance priorities.
Absolutely.
I'd love to see it.
Elisse Moreno.
I have to agree. Any COVID data that'll help us live better lives right now would be good. Back to like real estate and moving and transition though, there's a few that I wish I had better access to. Crime data, even though it's technically accessible through the Edmonton Police Service, it's not as accessible from a functionality and usage standpoint to use the data better. Land titles, instead of having to pay per land title, would be really awesome. And I don't know how much is on the open data right now, but noise data, or understanding a little bit about noise and context about moving and hear like what noise you're going to get in the neighborhood in terms of that.
That would be fascinating, even to know how it's tracked.
I know that the city for a while had a couple kind of, I don't know what they're called, but something that's similar to the measuring speed. Things that were measuring noise, and I think they were setting them up along Grote Road and in other places, maybe 109th, like where there do tend to be a lot of noisy vehicles. But the last I heard about it was a couple of years ago, and I am curious if they're still in use. And I think that any data the city had would be very localized to where they were monitoring. But you could also look at things like noise complaints, so that you could actually probably look at on 301 right now. I don't know if I'd have to double check what how they categorize those, but there might be something that is a noise complaint that you could then say, there were X number of noise complaints in this neighborhood.
Yeah, I'll have to check that too, because I know sometimes with 311, they don't always report it if it's like a private residence versus a public nuisance in terms of that. But that's a great thing. I'll definitely take a look at that. And I think it was Lower Land Networks is what they were, if I'm pronouncing it or saying it right. And I know with noise, it's really tough because like where can you sit it? Maybe when our smart tech in our homes will eventually have the noise, like with our stuff, and then that'll just transfer out.
So I have a couple questions that have come in for TruHome. So the first is, what tool are you using to host the lot width roof line map? Is it something custom?
That's a good question. No, I don't even know if it's custom. I'll have to double check that with my team, what we were doing on that one. I leave where we host things to do different things. We've used Tableau, we've used other systems as well, and I can message everyone and tell you how we're using that. But it's accessible to anybody. So if you want to see what it is, it's just your truehome.com/Edmonton-land-size if you want to play around with it.
And maybe what I'll do is I'll send, if all the presenters wanted to send me some kind of key links, I'll get the startup Edmonton folks to link them in the description, so people can go back to the Startup Week site and access some of these things that have been demoed. I have another question.
Message me Mapbox. That's what it was.
Oh, Mapbox. Okay. I have another question for you, Elisse Moreno. Since adopting data, has the company noticed a competitive edge in terms of the ability to help clients sell the house faster or help clients buy a house that is fair value?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely say we have more expertise on our hands in terms of the knowledge that we can provide to customers. We definitely dive deeper into the data when we're doing home analysis for homes. I also feel like just like anybody though, we learn as we go too. So even though the data is telling us everything that we can possibly know about a data, we are human. We sometimes love a house a little bit more than we probably should. But I'd say when we do look at the data clearly, I do feel we do have an advantage, at least from a knowledge sense. We have a deeper understanding. That being said, though, it's still footprints to the door. The more homes we're in, of course, the more knowledge we're going to have just by having that knowledge as well.
So I'm just having a quick look to see if we've had any more questions come in.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'd love to ask a question for Fareeza. When do you think that you'll have that? I was really interested in the data that you have around the impacts of COVID to Alberta, and I was just curious when you think you'll be ready to have that ready to release.
I'm hoping by the end of next week.
Oh wow!
I was also getting excited about that. I was like, that is just so cool. I want to play around with that too.
Yeah, it's everything in there is actually an open data source pulled. So everything in there is entirely open data source. I was trying to get the emergency wage subsidy data pulled in as well, and I was just having some technical difficulties because they seem to want to keep changing the file formats in between every month when they upload them, so my programs keep breaking sometimes. Anyways, so I have to fix something on that one, and yeah, just do some checks. But other than that, I think it's actually pretty close to being where I want it to be.
And is most of that data from StatsCan? Are they releasing it on the Government of Canada Open Data Portal, or?
It's a combination. They're the CERB and the wage subsidy, the CUES, I don't know how people are pronouncing that one, are both on the Open Canada portal, so those are their own data sets. And then the other ones are pretty much StatsCan data sets. That part will actually be identified in the dashboard itself. So on the last page, on the top there, I've got the tab that says sources. It does have the link to the open data page for each one of them, and I think I've got most of my StatsCan tables listed as well. So they should all be listed in there. And the goal would be to update the month as it kind of comes on. So see how it goes.
Was there any info on gender when in those data, like who's traveling or different people that are applying for CERB? I just feel like COVID's definitely hitting women a bit more in different contexts with young children. So that's always been on my brain lately. So
yeah, no, the gender breakdown actually looks pretty even. It's pretty it's definitely even. It seems to be about the same age, but they're not releasing data by age and gender. It's only by gender right now. So there hasn't been an ability to slice and dice it further at this point in time. In fact, they actually had one data set up that I downloaded, and then when I went back to download it again the next day, it had disappeared entirely, which is interesting, I thought, because I did see a statistic, I think, at one point that said that, we had at the peak 1 million Albertans who were getting the CERB, and then we had another 500,000 who were being supported by the wage subsidy, which means at one point we had almost 75% of our workforce being supported by the federal government in Alberta during this COVID impact. But they pulled that number, so I can't say how accurate it is.
Right.
So I don't know if they pulled it because it was wrong, or did they pull it because they don't want the information out there. I have no idea because they didn't say. I have a question back for Elise, though.
Sure.
One of the things that I've always wondered, I've lived in a couple of cities in my life, and in every other city, I've been pulled over for other things. So you get pulled over for failing to stop at a traffic light. You get pulled over for failing to stop at a stop sign. I have never been pulled over for anything in Edmonton. And I hope that's not putting a target on my back. Anyways, actually, I don't drive anymore, so it's not really an issue. Anyways, my question is, has there anybody done any analysis to actually take a look at that? Because I feel like, in some way, Edmonton does rely very, very heavily on photo radar. But I feel like I don't mind that. I don't have any issues with that. But I feel like it comes at a cost of other policing that they're not doing in terms of traffic. And I think that's one of the things, like the rolling stop and following too closely and those types of tickets. And I don't know if you or if you've seen any analysis comparing municipalities across the country for that type of data.
I haven't seen that analysis. That's one idea on my long list of ideas that I never got to before I took a leave of absence last year. But I have that too. Like, how many people have actually been stopped for failing to yield to a pedestrian, for example, right? Like, how much would it cost to do a campaign on that? How much effectiveness would it have? And how does that compare to the cost of running the publicity campaigns that they've done, right? They have different like over the years that I was covering that, they had multiple different campaigns, like asking people to wear bright clothing and different things like that, that had many people upset about victim blaming and stuff. But yeah, it's absolutely a question. How much, would it actually make a bigger difference if you just had they have big speeding campaigns where they have big speed events. What if they had a big stop for the crosswalk event? I don't know. So another good data set that I would love to see and have somebody help me analyze that one, because that would be a huge one.
If you ever get the data, I'll help you analyze it, but getting the data is the hard part. Even when I worked in government, that was the data set we didn't have access to, because it just doesn't go. I don't think the traffic stuff goes to the feds. So we never got that data back as a province.
Well, and I know the traffic data in general has been sort of a topic of big discussion too at the Edmonton level, because there's a bit of a weird relationship with the Office of Traffic Safety and the province, where the province, I believe, kind of owns the data, but the Office of Traffic Safety collects and maintains it. And so I know we've had lots of requests for that data. And I know our current team over in Office of Traffic Safety is looking at other things they can release that sort of meet the requirements. And there actually have been some new data sets released recently, but they're not down to the level of individual incidents.
Yeah, and it's strange. I've run into that before on a provincial level, asking them for the data. And they have a very specific interpretation. I think it's at the Alberta Traffic Act, where they believe that they can't release it. Whereas I personally don't think that's clear from the way that the Act is wording, but they are quite adamant that that's what they believe it means. So it would probably have to go to a panel, an appeal panel or something. Somebody would have to put in the Freedom of Information request and push it there so that they got somebody else to interpret. Well, I guess that can't go to the appeal because it's not the FOIP Act, but somehow there has to be some kind of public conversation about, okay, why aren't you releasing this information that, I mean, it seems like if you would release safety information, it could only support having a safer province, but it is a very complex, interesting question.
Well, it's interesting. Often some of the data sets we get requests for, that's one example. Restaurant inspections is another, where, because things work differently in different parts of the country. So the city of Toronto does their own restaurant inspections, right? And so they own that data and I think they release it. They have this whole fascinating restaurant inspection system there where you actually have something stuck up on the outside of your restaurant that says how good your last inspection was, so people could walk by and decide whether they want to go in based on the color of the page on your restaurant. So because that's something, again, at the provincial level, it's not something that we can release ourselves. Although I believe that the province is getting closer to being able to release that from their end. So, yeah. I'm just going to have one more peek at my email inbox here to see if we have any other questions that have come in. I did have one question I was going to ask, just kind of as we were, we're waiting for other questions, but then Max stole it. So that was going to be my question. If you could, and very selfishly, as someone who works on the open data program, I would like to know what other data sets people would like to see. And sometimes we can make them happen, sometimes we can't. But it's always good to hear. And I will put out there too, for anyone who's listening, if you have a data set idea, if there's something you would like to see, we do have a request a data set feature on our open data portal. And we see every single one of those requests. They all go through into a workflow, and we read every single one. And if we know that we can't action it for some reason, like we don't own the data or something like that, then we'll respond and let you know. And otherwise, it kind of goes into a process where we do try to find that data within the city of Edmonton and then release it on our portal. Sometimes it's a very quick and easy thing, especially if there aren't any FOIP or legal concerns around the data. Sometimes it's a much longer process to sort out all of those, as well as to kind of identify all the players who might, own a piece of that data.
It's a fascinating process. I'd love to hear more. I don't know if we have time, but I'd love to hear more about, like, if somebody is asking for some data that might be in some way sensitive, or that a department might be a bit reluctant to release, what kinds of information would help make the case, or what kinds of information are you looking for to help make the case to get that information released?
So we actually have a group that meets every few weeks, and we have representatives from both our FOIP team and our legal team. So they're able to actually, critically look at it and say, well, is there a FOIP concern with this data, or is there a legal concern? Like, do we own this data and we can release it, or do we not own it, or are there other impacts, and reasons we can't release it? And over the years, we built a really good relationship with this team, and it's great. Everyone, shows up every 3 weeks, and we set up the kind of data sets that are up for discussion. And it's really nice to have access to those resources and be able to get that expert advice. The other thing I find is the more people see open data being helpful to them as a business area, the more they're willing to release. I know we're seeing a lot more maps and data come out around things like snow clearing. I know there's going to be a snow clearing map this year because at some point it's worth putting in the time to get your data right and get it out, because it's going to head off, the number of media requests or the number of, those sorts of questions that you get. So we're seeing a lot more recognition of that, I would say, at the City of Edmonton, and people saying, well, if we put this in open data, then people can access it, and we don't have to necessarily answer the same question, 200 times every time we have a snowfall. So it's really encouraging to see, how people are realizing that, and how people are now, it used to be when the open data program started, we had to kind of explain to business areas what we were and why we would want to release their data. And now it's much more a case of, business areas coming to us saying, hey, I have this data. I want it to be in open data. Can you release it? Any other questions from panelists? I'm just going to have one more look, but I think that's all I have for questions from the crew that are watching on YouTube.
Not for me. I could keep going, but I can't really.
Well, thank you.
The data that comes out, is there like a top 3 that you're like are your favorite ones that have been released, or that you find that are used most often, or?
So the assessment data is always a favorite of everyone. I think it's lots of people use it, and it's interesting because even from the business area perspective in the city, we were just talking today about how are we going to schedule it so that the assessment data is out there for January 1st, because it's very important to everyone that is out, right as soon as the notices go out, it needs to be up on open data too. So it's, I would say that's, pretty high up there. The transit data obviously has been, I think it was one of the very first things we put in open data, and has been of great value to both individuals and also to businesses. So you've got, things like the transit app, but you've also got people building just cool little things to explore with it. So I present during the year. I don't know if anyone here has heard of City Hall School, but there's a teacher seconded from EPSB who has different classes who she used to have them come into City Hall. This year she's doing everything virtually. And I often will go in, or one of my team members will go in, and we'll talk about open data. And they love to see one of the tools that built using open data is called Busbird. And it's a live bus map of every bus that's on the road in Edmonton. And also it's colored based on whether the bus is on schedule or whether it's behind schedule or ahead of schedule. And tools like that they allow you to do, really fun, playful things, but also allow you to, gain knowledge about city services. We look at the map and go, can you tell where the transit centers are by like where the clusters of buses are? So that's pretty neat. Yeah, I think so. I think the transit data and the assessment data are kind of the two really big ones. And, as I said before, I have a soft spot for the pet license data because I think it's just really fun to explore.
It is.
And I have heard a rumor, I don't know for sure where we're at with it, but that we might have a zoo animal data set sometime in the near future too, which would be pretty neat.
Zoo animal?
Yep.
As in like exotic animals, or
animals that live at the Edmonton Valley Zoo.
In the zoo. Okay, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know the pet assessment or the pet data is really useful, especially if you don't like certain animals, like certain birds or whatnot. I mean, I don't want to live by someone who has 42 of them, for example. So, it's a big one to know where people live with the data.
I think one of my other favorite things has just been the ability to combine different data sets. So a couple of years ago, we made a tool called the Kids Map of Edmonton. And we took things like playground locations and public washrooms and rec centers and libraries, right? So kind of had the thought that all of these things are in our open data portal as individual data sets. And, the public could go and see them individually, and maybe someone made a tool that would let you view them. But if we combine them all together, you can get this really valuable tool for caregivers or kids to see, different things that they might like to do in a particular area of the city. So maybe you want to find, somewhere with a child-friendly restaurant because there's a child-friendly businesses data set that's near a playground or near a rec center, so you can go for a swim. So that was, kind of one of my other favorite open data projects.
Does the data say, like, for example, restaurants for kids at this point? Does it say, like, the time frames, or is that up to the restaurants to decide?
No, it's up to the restaurants to decide. And so this was it was an initiative of Child Friendly Edmonton, and they did a big media campaign a couple of years ago where, as a business, you could opt in to be in their list of child-friendly businesses. And I believe it's just some basic information like, address, phone number, website, maybe the type of business it is. But it's basically just kind of a catalog of all the businesses that have the child-friendly designation.
Got it. I'd also be curious how many have changed tables in the men's and women's washroom.
Yes. I don't know if it's in the data set. I know whether or not there are change tables is one of the things that kind of got you points towards being a child-friendly business. But I can't remember if it's actually in the data set. My big dream actually for next summer, maybe I meant to do it this summer but didn't have time, is we've gotten surfaces added to the playground data. And so you could make a playground finder tool, but maybe you only want to go to playgrounds that don't have sand.
I will help you with that. Avoid the sand on the wet days.
Yeah. So that's, it was, and another example of where, we had that existing open data set. We augmented it because we had that extra information. And I thought, one evening in my free time, I'm going to build a playground finder for me and my kids, but didn't get to it this summer. I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. So I think perhaps we'll wrap up here. I want to thank all of you, Fareeza and Elise. Very cool that we have two Elises on the call, for joining me today and spending some time talking about how you use open data. I believe everyone's names, I'm not sure about contact info, is on the Startup Week page. I can be reached at opendata@edmonton.ca, and if any people viewing the feed do have questions, if they want to be connected with one of the panelists from today, I'm happy to facilitate that. I'll also get the Startup Week folks to link some of the projects that you folks talked about on our event page after this. So once again, thank you very much. It was great to talk to everyone. Maybe next year we'll be able to do this in person. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Karen.